The look on my son's face is something I'll never forget. In that moment, standing there in the middle of that beautiful farmhouse with 20 pairs of eyes boring into me, I felt smaller than I ever had in my entire life. Just minutes before, I'd been laughing, actually laughing, as I pushed aside that frail woman in the faded overalls and dirt-stained work boots. "Excuse me," I'd said with a smirk, "but the real estate agent is expecting us. This is going to be our summer home, so you might want to finish up whatever maintenance you're doing." Then my son Tyler's voice cracked through the silence. "Mom, that's Margaret Winters. She owns the entire property. She's been running this farm for 50 years. The cup of expensive coffee I'd been holding slipped from my fingers, splashing across the handmade quilt on the antique bench. A quilt, I would later learn, that Margaret's mother had made during the Great Depression, using scraps from her husband's war uniform. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The coffee spread in a dark stain across the fabric, like my shame spreading across that room. Margaret just stood there, all 5 foot nothing of her, those weathered hands that had worked this land for half a century now clasped tightly in front of her. Behind her, a group of locals and family members who'd gathered for what I would soon discover was her 80th birthday celebration. They'd been in the middle of surprising her when we barged in, demanding a tour of our future property, the property that was never for sale, the property that had been in her family since before the Civil War. And now my coffee was soaking into a piece of her family history, while my words hung in the air between us. But let me back up. You need to understand how I became this person. The kind of woman who would push aside an elderly farmer on her own property and laugh about it. The kind who would assume that anything and anyone could be bought for the right price. I wasn't always like this. Or maybe I was, and I just didn't know it until money and status peeled back the veneer I'd carefully constructed around myself. They say, money doesn't change you, it just reveals who you truly are. If that's true, then what was revealed about me that day at Winters Farm wasn't pretty, but it was the wake-up call I desperately needed, even though I didn't know it at the time. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, every humiliating detail, because maybe my story will help you recognize something in yourself before you end up standing in a room full of strangers, watching coffee soak into something irreplaceable. It started 3 years ago, when my husband David's tech company was acquired for $147 million. We weren't the founders, but David had been there from almost the beginning. Employee number 12, with enough stock options to change our lives forever. One day we were solidly upper middle class, living in a nice suburban 4-bedroom in Westchester County, driving sensible cars and taking one nice vacation a year. The next, we had $8.4 million in our bank account after taxes. It doesn't sound as impressive as the full acquisition amount, but trust me, it changed everything. I remember staring at the bank balance on my phone screen, sitting in our IKEA kitchen that suddenly seemed shabby and small. "We need to move," I told David that night. "We need a bigger house, a better neighborhood, better schools for Tyler." David looked at me strangely. "Tyler's school is one of the best in the state. He's got friends there. He's happy." I didn't listen. I couldn't. All I could think about was the fact that we could finally have what I'd always wanted: status, recognition, the envy of others. Looking back, I realized that's when the shift began. Though it would take me years and one devastating morning at Winters Farm to understand the full extent of the damage. Within 6 months, we'd moved to an exclusive community in Greenwich, Connecticut. Our new house cost $3.2 million, and I spent another $480,000 on furniture and renovations. I remember the designer asking if we wanted to keep any of our old furniture, and I laughed, actually laughed at the suggestion. "God, no," I said. "I want everything new." The truth is, I wanted everything to look expensive. I wanted everyone who walked into our home to immediately understand that we had money now, real money, the kind of money that could buy respect. I see now how pathetic that sounds, but at the time, I was intoxicated by the possibilities. I joined the right clubs, donated to the right charities, sent Tyler to the right private school, even though he begged to stay with his friends. "You'll make better friends," I told him. "The kind of connections that will set you up for life." He was 13 then, just starting to form his own identity, and I was already trying to reshape him into someone else. someone whose value was tied to his net worth and social standing. David went along with the move and the new house, but he started pushing back on other things. He didn't want to join the country club. He didn't see the point in trading in his Audi for a Bentley. The Audi's only 2 years old, he said when I brought home brochures for luxury cars. It's perfectly good. I remember snapping at him. Perfectly good isn't good enough anymore. We need to present ourselves properly. That became my mantra, presenting ourselves properly, as if our entire lives were just a performance for other people's benefit. David and I started fighting more frequently. Small arguments at first, but they grew larger as I pushed for more changes, more upgrades to our lifestyle. I didn't recognize it then, but the money was creating a wedge between us. Or maybe I was the one driving it in, hammering it deeper with every unnecessary purchase and social climbing effort. I think the moment everything really started to unravel was at the Prescott's annual summer gala. Jennifer Prescott was the unofficial queen of our social circle, married to a hedge fund manager, living in a mansion that made our new house look modest. Getting invited to their summer party was a coup for me, proof that I was being accepted into the inner circle. I spent $12,000 on a dress for the occasion, a hand-bedded Elisab that I knew would make a statement. David balked at the price, but I insisted it was an investment in our social standing. I even hired a stylist, a makeup artist, and had my hair done at the most expensive salon in Manhattan. I was determined to look the part of the wealthy, sophisticated woman I believed myself to be. The night of the party, I felt like a movie star walking into that ballroom. People noticed me, or at least, I thought they did. I caught glimpses of women whispering to each other as I passed, and I assumed they were admiring my dress, my jewelry, the confident way I carried myself. I worked the room like I'd been born into this world of privilege, dropping casual mentions of our recent trip to the Maldives, the interior designer we'd hired, the schools we were considering for Tyler when it was time for him to apply to college. Looking back, I can see how transparent I was, how desperate, but at the time, I felt powerful, until I overheard Jennifer Prescott herself, standing with 2 other women near the bar, not realizing I was just on the other side of a large floral arrangement. "The Harrises," she said with a laugh that made my blood run cold. "They're so eager." Patricia practically begged for an invitation. I didn't have the heart to tell her this isn't the main event. "The real party is tomorrow at the Vineyard." The other women tittered, and one added, "That dress must have cost a fortune, and it's trying so hard." I froze, champagne flute halfway to my lips. They were laughing at me. The $12,000 dress, the professional makeup, the hours spent preparing, none of it mattered. I wasn't one of them. I was entertainment. I think about that moment often now. How it should have been a wake-up call, a chance to reassess what I was becoming and why. Instead, it made me double down. If they thought I was trying too hard, I would try even harder. If they had a secret party at a vineyard, I would find a way to get invited next time. If my house wasn't impressive enough, I would find a bigger one, a better one. That's when I started looking for a summer home, not because we needed one or even particularly wanted one, but because it was what people in our circle did. They had homes in the Hamptons or on Martha's Vineyard. They had ski chalets in Aspen. They had farms in Vermont where they could pretend to be rustic on the weekends while household staff did all the actual work. That's how I found myself, 18 months after moving to Greenwich, searching for the perfect statement property. Not just any summer home would do. It needed to be special, unique, something that would make the Jennifer Prescotts of the world sit up and take notice. I scoured real estate listings, rejected dozens of perfectly lovely properties, and finally found what I thought was the answer: a historic farm in the Hudson Valley, just a 2-hour drive from our primary residence. The online listing showed a stunning 19th-century farmhouse, beautifully maintained, set on 75 acres of rolling fields and woods. There were outbuildings that could be converted into guest houses, a picturesque barn that would be perfect for entertaining, and even a small apple orchard. It was exactly the kind of place where we could host lavish weekend parties, where Tyler could bring friends from his new school, where David could finally invite his colleagues and show them that he'd arrived. There was just one problem. The farm wasn't actually for sale. The listing I'd found was for a neighboring property that had sold the previous year. But in my research, I'd become fixated on Winter's farm. It was more beautiful, more historic, more perfect than the property that had sold. And in my entitled, money-blinded state, I convinced myself that everything had a price. Everyone had a price. The fact that there was no for sale sign didn't deter me. It just meant I needed to make an offer the owners couldn't refuse. So I contacted a local real estate agent, Heather Blackwell, and told her I wanted to see Winter's farm. I still remember her confusion. "Ma'am, that property isn't on the market," she said. I brushed her off. "Everyone has a price," I told her. "Just set up a viewing. Tell them we're serious buyers." After some hesitation, she agreed to reach out to the owners. A week later, Heather called back. "Ms. Harris, I've spoken with the caretaker of Winter's farm. The owner is elderly and not interested in selling, but the caretaker has agreed to let us tour the grounds, not the house, as a courtesy. I must emphasize that this is highly unusual, and the property is not for sale." I heard what I wanted to hear. We had a foot in the door. The rest would be negotiation. I didn't register the emphasis on not for sale or consider what it meant that an elderly owner was being imposed upon by my demands. All I could think was that this was my chance to acquire the perfect status symbol. "Book it for this Saturday," I told Heather. "We'll drive up from Greenwich." She sighed audibly but agreed to arrange it. That Saturday morning, I spent 2 hours getting ready, as if I were going to a social event rather than to view a property. I chose an outfit that I thought struck the perfect balance between casual and wealthy. Designer jeans, an $800 cashmere sweater, and boots that had never seen actual farm dirt. David was scheduled to work, catching up on some project deadline, so it would just be Tyler and me. Tyler, now 15, was less than thrilled about spending his Saturday looking at a farm. "Can't I just stay home?" "Travis invited me to play basketball," he pleaded. Over breakfast, I fixed him with a stern look. "This is family time, Tyler. Besides, wouldn't you like to have a place where you can invite Travis and your other friends for weekend getaways? Think of the parties we could have." He mumbled something under his breath that I chose to ignore, and reluctantly got ready. The drive up was tense. Tyler had his AirPods in the entire time, staring out the window, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. I filled the silence with chatter about my plans for the farm, how we'd renovate the main house, convert the barn into an entertainment space, maybe put in a pool. I was living in a fantasy, spinning elaborate scenarios about hosting the Prescotts and watching their faces when they saw our incredible weekend property. I didn't once think about what the farm meant to its current owners. I didn't consider the history or the emotional attachment they might have to the land. In my mind, it was already mine. The current owners were just obstacles to be overcome with a sufficiently large check. We pulled up to Winter's farm around noon. The reality was even more beautiful than the photographs I'd found online. The white farmhouse was nestled among ancient maple trees, with a wide wraparound porch and gingerbread trim that spoke of another era. The red barn stood proudly against the backdrop of rolling hills, and I could see apple trees in the distance, their branches heavy with fruit. It was idyllic, perfect. I remember thinking, this is how I show them all that I've arrived. I didn't see a home, I saw a trophy. Heather's car was already parked in the gravel drive, and she stood talking with an older man who I assumed was the caretaker she'd mentioned. They both turned as we pulled up, and I could read reluctance in their body language. "Mrs. Harris," Heather greeted me as I stepped out of the car. "This is Jim Winters. He helps manage the property." I extended my hand, already dismissing him in my mind as hired help. "Pleasure," I said, barely looking at him as my eyes swept over the property. "So when can we see inside the house?" Jim cleared his throat. "As Heather probably told you, Mrs. Harris, we agreed to show you the grounds only. The main house isn't open for viewing, as it's not for sale." I laughed, actually laughed, and patted his arm condescendingly. "Oh, I understand how these things work, but surely we can take a quick peek. We're serious buyers, and I'm prepared to make a very generous offer." Jim's face hardened. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. This farm has been in our family for generations. It's not for sale at any price." I should have heard him. I should have respected his words and his obvious attachment to the place. Instead, I smiled tightly and said, "Everyone has a price, Mr. Winters. Everyone. I then turned to Heather, effectively dismissing him. Shall we start the tour? Heather looked uncomfortable, but she nodded and began showing us around the property. As we walked, I continued to pepper her with questions about the house, making it clear I intended to see inside one way or another. Tyler trailed behind us, hands shoved in his pockets, radiating teenage embarrassment. I ignored his discomfort, too focused on my goal to care about his feelings. I see now how selfish that was, how I was teaching him all the wrong lessons about entitlement and respecting others' boundaries. The tours of the grounds took about an hour. Every step I took, I fell more in love with the property, not for its inherent beauty or the sense of peace it exuded, but for what owning it would say about me. We saw the apple orchard, the old sugar maple grove where they still produced syrup each spring, the picturesque pond where generations of Winter's children had learned to swim and fish. Jim shared these details reluctantly, watching me with growing wariness as I mentally reimagined each spot. The pond would need a dock for my vision of sophistication. Lakeside cocktail parties. The orchard would be pruned and shaped into something more ornamental than productive. The sugar shack would make a quaint guest cottage. I didn't appreciate what was there. I only saw what I could change to impress others. As we circled back toward the main house, I saw a small gathering of people on the porch. There were perhaps 20 of them, ranging from elderly to young children, and they seemed to be setting up for some kind of celebration. Tables were being arranged, a homemade banner was being hung, and someone was carrying what looked like a cake. This, I decided, was my opportunity. Look, I said to Heather, there's clearly an event happening. We should go introduce ourselves. After all, if we're going to be buying this place, we should meet the family. Before Heather could stop me, I was striding toward the house, Tyler reluctantly following behind me. I heard Heather call out, "Mrs. Harris, wait," but I pretended not to hear. As I approached the porch, a small woman in faded overalls came out of the house carrying a stack of plates. She had silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, and her face was deeply lined from years in the sun. She looked up, startled to see strangers approaching her home. I didn't recognize her as anyone important. She looked like a worker, maybe the housekeeper. Later, I would learn that Margaret Winters had never hired help for her daily chores. At 80 years old, she still cooked her own meals, tended her own garden, and helped with the farm work alongside her family. But in that moment, all I saw was someone in my way. "Excuse me," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We're here to tour the house. Is the owner available?" The woman looked confused. "Tour the house? There must be some mistake. We're not giving tours today." I laughed that dismissive laugh again and stepped closer. "No, you don't understand. We're here to buy the property. I'm sure the owners would want to meet potential buyers who are ready to make a serious offer." The woman's expression changed then, from confusion to something harder. "I'm sorry, but this farm is not for sale," I sighed, dramatically. Yes, that's what everyone keeps saying. But like I told the caretaker, everyone has a price. Now, if you could just step aside and let us in." And that's when I did it. I actually put my hand on her shoulder and physically moved her aside, laughing as I did so, as if the very idea that she could stand between me and what I wanted was amusing. There was a collective gasp from the people on the porch. I looked up, suddenly aware that we had an audience. Tyler, who had been hanging back, mortified by my behavior, suddenly stepped forward. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "what are you doing?" I turned to him, irritated by his interruption. "Tyler, please, the adults are handling this." He shook his head, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just embarrassment, but genuine shame. "No, Mom, you don't get it. I've been reading about this place since we got in the car. This farm has been featured in history books and local publications. That woman you just pushed, that's Margaret Winters. She owns the entire property. She's been running this farm for 50 years. And that's where we came in, with me standing in the middle of that farmhouse, coffee spilling across an irreplaceable family heirloom, 20 pairs of eyes staring at me in disgust, and the weight of what I'd done crashing down on my shoulders. The silence seemed to stretch for an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. Finally, A tall man who I would later learn was Jim's son and Margaret's grandson stepped forward. "I think you should leave," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? I'd barged onto private property, disrespected an elderly woman in her own home, damaged a family heirloom, all in pursuit of a status symbol I thought I could buy. Tyler was the one who spoke. "I'm so sorry," he said, looking directly at Margaret. We shouldn't have." He couldn't finish, but his sincerity was clear in every syllable. Margaret Winters studied my son for a moment, then nodded slightly. Her eyes, when they turned to me, weren't angry as I expected. They were something worse, pitying, as if she could see right through me, to the insecure, status-hungry person I'd become. "Young man," she said to Tyler, "you seem to have a good heart. Your mother could learn something from you." Then to me, she added, "This land has been in my family since 1856. My great-great-grandfather built this house with his own hands after coming home from the war. The quilt you just ruined was made by my mother from my father's uniform after he was killed in World War II. There is no price that would make me sell it to someone who sees it as nothing but a status symbol." Her words were like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full impact of what I'd done hit me. Heather, who had followed us to the house, gently took my elbow. "We should go," she murmured. I let her lead me away, too stunned to resist. As we walked back to the cars, I heard the buzz of conversation resume behind us. I didn't have to understand the words to know they were talking about me, about my behavior, about the entitlement that had led me to this moment of profound humiliation. Tyler walked several paces ahead, shoulders hunched, refusing to look at me. When we reached the cars, Heather turned to me with professional courtesy, but unmistakable coolness. "Mrs. Harris, I won't be able to represent you in any future property searches. I suggest you reconsider what you're really looking for." She got into her car without waiting for a response, and drove away, gravel crunching under her tires. Tyler and I stood in awkward silence beside our car. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "That was really messed up, Mom. Really messed up." I felt defensive anger rise up. "Tyler, you don't understand. These business dealings can get complicated." He looked at me then, really looked at me, with an expression that made him suddenly seem much older than his 15 years. "It's not a business dealing. It's their home. And you treated that old lady like she was nothing, like she was in your way." His words cut through my defenses, leaving me exposed and raw. "Is this who we are now?" he asked. "Is this who you want me to be?" I didn't have an answer for him. We drove home in silence, the weight of his questions filling the car. When we got back to Greenwich, I found myself wandering through our expensively decorated house, seeing it with new eyes. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every status symbol I'd accumulated, suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. I picked up a crystal vase that had cost more than my first car and felt nothing but emptiness. What was I trying to prove, and to whom? David found me sitting in the dark in our living room, still in my coat. "How was the farm?" he asked, flipping on a light. I flinched at the sudden brightness, at being seen. "I ruined everything," I whispered. He sat beside me, concerned. "What happened?" And so I told him, sparing myself nothing, the way I'd dismissed Jim, pushed past Margaret, damaged the quilt, embarrassed our son. I expected anger, disappointment, even contempt. But what I saw in David's eyes was sadness, and somehow that was worse. "Patricia," he said gently, "what's happened to you? To us? This isn't the woman I married." I felt tears spring to my eyes, the first real tears I'd cried in years, not the practiced, controlled tears I sometimes produced for effect at charity galas. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know who I am anymore." David took my hand, and I realized with a jolt how long it had been since we'd shared a genuine moment of connection. "The money changed things," he said, "but it didn't have to change us this much." I nodded, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. "I think," he continued carefully, "that we need to take a step back, reevaluate what's really important. Because this, the house, the cars, the parties, the endless striving for more, it's not making any of us happy." He was right, of course. The money hadn't brought us happiness. It had only revealed and magnified our insecurities, particularly mine. I'd spent the past 2 years trying to buy my way into a world that didn't want me, abandoning my values, neglecting my family, and becoming someone I didn't recognize or like very much. But acknowledging the problem was only the first step. The harder part would be figuring out how to fix it, how to make amends for the damage I'd done to my family, to others, and to myself. I spent a sleepless night thinking about Margaret Winters and her farm, about the disrespect I'd shown her, about the family heirloom I'd damaged with my carelessness. The more I thought about it, the more ashamed I felt, until I knew what I had to do. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't erase what had happened, but it was the necessary first step on what would be a long journey back to myself. The next morning, I got up early and drove to a small bakery in our town that I'd always admired but had never actually visited. It wasn't prestigious enough for the new me I'd been trying to create. I bought a selection of pastries, then stopped at a florist for a simple but beautiful arrangement. Then I drove back to Winter's farm, my heart pounding with anxiety. What if they refused to see me? What if they called the police? I wouldn't blame them if they did. As I pulled up to the farmhouse, I saw Jim in the yard, splitting firewood. He straightened when he saw my car, his expression guarded. I parked and got out, carrying my peace offerings. "Mrs. Harris," he said flatly, "I didn't expect to see you again." I swallowed hard. "Mr. Winters, I owe you and your mother a profound apology. What I did yesterday was inexcusable. I was wondering if she would be willing to see me, just for a few minutes." He studied me, trying to gauge my sincerity. Finally, he nodded, toward the house. "She's on the porch." I thanked him and walked up the path, each step requiring an effort of will. Margaret was sitting in a rocking chair, shelling peas into a bowl, her fingers moving with the dexterity of decades of practice. She looked up as I approached, her expression neutral but not welcoming. "Mrs. Winters," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I came to apologize. My behavior yesterday was appalling. I was disrespectful to you, to your home, and to your family's history. I damaged something irreplaceable, and I am deeply, truly sorry." I held out the flowers and pastries, knowing they were woefully inadequate but not knowing what else to do. To my surprise, she motioned for me to set them on the small table beside her and indicated the empty chair across from her. "Sit," she said. It wasn't a request. I sat, hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop their trembling. Margaret looked at me for a long moment, her eyes wise and penetrating. "You know what your problem is," she finally said. "You've forgotten how to see value in things that can't be bought." I blinked, startled by her directness. "This farm," she continued, gesturing around us, "isn't valuable because of what it would sell for. It's valuable because of what it means. 5 generations of my family have lived and worked this land. My husband is buried under that oak tree over there. I birthed my children in the bedroom upstairs. When you came here yesterday, all you saw was a commodity, something to acquire. You didn't see a home." Her words were like arrows, finding every vulnerable spot in my armor. "I know," I whispered. "I'm beginning to understand that now." She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "Your boy, he seems like a good kid, not spoiled yet." I felt a pang of guilt. He's a much better person than I've been lately." Margaret resumed shelling peas, her fingers nimble despite her age. "Tell me about yourself," she said unexpectedly. "The real you, not the woman who showed up here yesterday." The question caught me off guard. Who was I, really? I'd spent so long trying to be someone else that I wasn't sure I knew anymore. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. I started hesitantly. My parents were teachers. We never had much money, but we were happy. I met my husband in college. We were both the first in our families to go. We worked hard, built a life together, had our son. Then a few years ago, my husband's company was acquired, and suddenly we had money, real money, and I think I lost myself. I hadn't planned to be so honest, but something about Margaret's steady gaze drew the truth from me. I became obsessed with status, with fitting in with people who have always had wealth. I pushed my family to change schools, neighborhoods, friends. I spent ridiculous amounts on things we didn't need. I became someone I don't recognize or like very much. Margaret nodded, as if my story confirmed something she already knew. "Money," she said, "is like water. Too little, and things die of thirst. Too much, all at once, and they can drown. She set aside her bowl of peas and leaned forward. Slightly. That quilt you spilled coffee on, it can be cleaned. The damage isn't permanent. I felt a wave of relief, so intense, it brought tears to my eyes. Really, I was so worried. She held up a hand to stop me. The quilt can be fixed. The question is, can you? Her directness was startling but also oddly comforting. There was no artifice here, no social games or hidden meanings. Just an honest question that cut to the heart of the matter. I want to, I said quietly. I need to. For myself, for my family. I don't want to be the person I was yesterday. Margaret studied me for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. Good, she said simply. That's a start. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the creak of her rocking chair and the distant calls of birds. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Finally, she spoke again. You want to make amends? Real amends, not just words. I nodded eagerly. Yes, anything. She smiled slightly. Don't say anything too quickly. You might regret it. What Margaret proposed surprised me. She didn't want money. In fact, she refused it outright when I offered to pay for professional cleaning of the quilt. Instead, she suggested I come back the following Saturday to help with the harvest festival they held each year. We need extra hands, she said. And it might do you good to see what this farm really means to the community. I agreed immediately, though I had no idea what I was getting myself into. As I drove home, I felt lighter somehow. As if the beginning of forgiveness both from Margaret and from myself had created space for something new to grow. I didn't tell David or Tyler about my plans for the following weekend. I was too afraid they wouldn't believe I was serious, or worse, that they would laugh at the idea of me doing manual labor on a farm. The week passed in a blur of uncomfortable self-reflection. I found myself looking critically at everything I'd purchased over the past 2 years, questioning my motivations for each acquisition. I canceled a lunch with some of the Greenwich wives, claiming illness when in reality I simply couldn't face another 3 hours of competitive consumption disguised as socializing. I called Tyler's old school and inquired about re-enrollment possibilities for the following year. Then spent an hour crying when I realized how much damage I might have done to my son's sense of stability and belonging. When Saturday came, I got up early and dressed in the most casual clothes I owned, which were still embarrassingly fancy for farm work. I left a note for David saying I had a volunteer commitment, then drove the now familiar route to Winter's farm. When I arrived, the place was already bustling with activity. Tents were being set up in the large field beside the barn, tables and chairs arranged, decorations hung. People of all ages were working together, calling out greetings and instructions to one another. I felt suddenly out of place and painfully visible in my designer casual wear. Margaret spotted me hovering uncertainly at the edge of the activity and waved me over. You came, she said, sounding mildly surprised. I wasn't sure you would. I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. I said I would. She looked me up and down, taking in my impractical outfit, and I felt myself flush with embarrassment, but she only nodded toward a nearby tent. Rachel over there needs help setting up the produce display. Think you can handle arranging vegetables artfully? There was a hint of challenge in her voice, as if she was daring me to complain about the menial task, but I was determined to prove to her and to myself that I could do this. Absolutely, I said, and headed toward the tent she'd indicated. Rachel turned out to be Margaret's granddaughter, a woman about my age with her grandmother's direct gaze and no-nonsense manner. She eyed me suspiciously when I introduced myself, and I realized with a sinking feeling that everyone here probably knew exactly who I was and what I'd done. Grandma said you'd be helping today, she said, her tone neutral but not friendly. Ever arranged a harvest display before? I shook my head. No, but I'm a quick learner. She nodded briefly. Good start, bringing those baskets of apples from the truck. We'll set them up here. And so began my crash course in farm work. Over the next few hours, I carried more heavy baskets than I could count, learned the names of apple varieties I'd never heard of, arranged vegetables according to Rachel's exacting standards, and got thoroughly dirty in the process. My back ached, my arms trembled with fatigue, and my expensive sneakers were caked with mud, but strangely, I didn't mind. There was something satisfying about the physical work, about seeing the direct results of my efforts as the display took shape. Rachel warmed up slightly as the morning progressed, especially when she saw that I was genuinely trying my best. By lunchtime, she was actually explaining things to me rather than just issuing curt instructions. "So the festival's been happening for how long?" I asked as we took a short water break. Rachel wiped sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "Since my great-grandparents' time, over 80 years now. It started as a simple harvest celebration, but it's grown into a community tradition. People come from miles around." She gestured toward the field, which was now fully set up with various tents, a small stage, and activity areas. "We'll have live music, pie contests, games for the kids, farm tours. All the produce you've been arranging will be for sale, with a portion of proceeds going to the local food bank." I was impressed, despite myself. This wasn't just a quaint farm activity. It was a significant community event with real purpose behind it. "And your grandmother still organizes all this?" I asked, thinking of Margaret's age and the enormous amount of work involved. Rachel nodded, a note of pride in her voice. "Grandma's the heart of this place. She'll be 81 next month, and she still outworks people half her age. After Grandpa died 15 years ago, everyone thought she'd sell the farm. It's a lot for one person to manage, but she refused. Said this land was her partner now." There was something in her words that struck me deeply. The idea of being in relationship with a place, of having a connection so profound that it sustained you even through grief and hardship. As the festival opened to the public, I found myself assigned to the apple cider station, working alongside Jim's wife, Linda. She taught me how to operate the press, how to sort apples for the best flavor blend, how to strain the juice. It was sticky, messy work, but there was immediate gratification in handing cups of fresh cider to appreciative visitors. I noticed that many of them greeted Linda by name, asked after her family, shared news of their own lives. This wasn't just a commercial transaction. It was a community connection. I thought about my own neighborhood in Greenwich, where I barely knew my neighbors' names despite living there for almost 2 years. Midway through the afternoon, I looked up from the cider press to see a familiar figure approaching David, with Tyler beside him. My heart lurched. How had they found me? What would they think? David's expression was unreadable as he reached the booth, but Tyler looked stunned, taking in my dirty clothes and disheveled appearance. "Patricia," David said uncertainly. "What are you doing?" I wiped my hands nervously on my apron. I'm helping with the Harvest Festival." "How did you find me?" He held up my note. "You said you had a volunteer commitment. When you weren't answering your phone, I checked the location on your car through the app. We were worried." Before I could respond, Linda stepped forward. "You must be Patricia's family. I'm Linda Winters." She extended her hand, which David shook automatically, still looking confused. "Your wife has been a tremendous help today. We couldn't have managed the cider station without her." David's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and I saw Tyler trying to reconcile this new information with the mother he knew. "Would you like to try some?" Linda continued, pouring 2 cups of cider and offering them to my husband and son. "Fresh pressed this afternoon." They accepted the cups, and I watched as they took tentative sips, then more enthusiastic ones. "This is really good," Tyler said, sounding surprised. Linda smiled. "Nothing like cider from apples picked that same morning. Patricia's got quite a knack for getting the blend right." Tyler looked at me with new eyes, as if seeing a version of his mother he'd forgotten existed, or perhaps had never known. "Mom, what is all this?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "Remember, last Saturday, the farm I wanted to buy, the woman I was so rude to?" His expression darkened at the memory, but he nodded. "Well, I came back to apologize, and somehow ended up volunteering for their harvest festival, and I'm actually enjoying it." The admission surprised even me, but it was true. Despite the physical exhaustion and the initial awkwardness, I was genuinely enjoying the work, the purpose, the sense of being part of something authentic. David studied me for a long moment, then slowly smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, in a way I hadn't seen in too long. "Can we help?" he asked, and the simple question nearly brought me to tears. I'm sure they could use extra hands, I managed to say. Linda nodded enthusiastically. Always. Jim could use help at the hayride, and the kids' games area is short-staffed. And just like that, my family was swept into the activities of Winter's Farm, my carefully constructed facade of Greenwich perfection completely abandoned as we immersed ourselves in the community celebration. Tyler, initially hesitant, was soon helping younger children with a pumpkin decorating activity, his natural patience and kindness shining through in a way that made my heart ache with both pride and regret for how I'd been pushing him to be someone else. As the festival wound down in the early evening, Margaret found me helping to stack empty crates by the barn. "Well," she said, looking me up and down, "you survived." I laughed. A genuine laugh, unlike the artificial one I'd cultivated for social occasions. "Barely. I haven't worked this hard in years." She nodded approvingly. "Hard work clears the mind. Helps you see what matters." She nodded toward where David and Tyler were helping dismantle one of the tents, working together with easy camaraderie. "Your family seems nice. Real." The simple assessment hit me with unexpected force. Real. When was the last time I'd allowed us to be real, rather than carefully crafted projections of what I thought we should be? "They are," I agreed quietly. "I haven't been very good to them lately." Margaret made a non-committal sound. "People make mistakes. The question is whether they learn from them." She fixed me with that penetrating gaze again. "Are you learning, Patricia Harris?" I thought about the day, the physical work, the genuine connections, the simple pleasure of creating something useful with my own hands. I thought about seeing my son and husband working alongside strangers, laughing, contributing, being valued for who they were rather than what they owned or represented. "Yes," I said finally, "I think I am." That day at Winter's Farm marked the beginning of a profound transformation for me and for my family. It didn't happen overnight. Changing ingrained patterns of thinking and behavior never does. But it was a turning point. The moment when I began to question everything about the life I'd been so desperately trying to build and to consider what really mattered to me. The following week, I called Margaret and asked if I could come back, not for another event, but just to talk. To my surprise, she agreed, and over the next few months, our unlikely friendship became a cornerstone of my recovery from the person I'd almost become. Margaret, with her direct manner and 9 decades of hard-won wisdom, became something of a mentor to me. She never sugarcoated her opinions or spared my feelings, but her honesty was exactly what I needed. "You got caught up in trying to be special," she told me during one of our conversations on her porch. "But true specialness isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn through how you treat others, how you contribute, what you create." I thought of the Greenwich social circle I'd been so desperate to join, of Jennifer Prescott and her exclusionary parties, of the hollow validation I'd been seeking. "I think I always felt like I wasn't enough," I admitted. "Like I needed the right address, the right clothes, the right connections to have value." Margaret snorted. "That's the biggest lie of all. Value isn't assigned by others. It's created by you, through what you do and how you live." Those conversations with Margaret became a lifeline as I began the difficult process of untangling myself from the web of materialism and social striving I'd constructed. I canceled my country club membership. I stopped attending charity events where the focus was more on being seen than on actual charitable work. I put our Greenwich house on the market, a decision that initially terrified me but ultimately felt liberating. David, who had been quietly unhappy with our lifestyle shift for years, supported these changes wholeheartedly. Tyler was more hesitant, having finally adjusted to his new school and made some friends. But when we sat down as a family to discuss returning to Westchester, he admitted that he missed his old friends and would be happy to go back. The most difficult part was facing the reality of how I'd been behaving, the people I'd hurt, the values I'd compromised, the example I'd set for my son. I spent many nights unable to sleep, replaying moments of shocking entitlement and snobbery that now made me cringe with shame. But Margaret, in her no-nonsense way, wouldn't let me wallow in self-recrimination. "Regret is only useful if it changes your actions," she told me firmly. "Otherwise, it's just self-indulgence." So, instead of just feeling bad about my behavior, I began to actively make amends. I apologized to our old neighbors for my sudden coldness when we'd come into money. I reached out to friends I'd dropped because they weren't prestigious enough for my new image. I wrote a heartfelt letter to Heather, the real estate agent I'd manipulated into arranging the Winters Farm viewing, expressing my remorse for putting her in such an uncomfortable position, and I talked to Tyler, really talked to him, with honesty and vulnerability I hadn't shown in years. I apologized for uprooting him from his friends in school, for pushing him to change to fit an image I'd created, for the person I'd been modeling for him. I was wrong, I told him one evening, as we sat on the back porch of our Greenwich house, looking out at the manicured garden that had cost a small fortune but had never brought me joy. I got caught up in trying to be something we're not, and I dragged you and Dad along with me. I'm so sorry, Tyler. He was quiet for a long time, and I respected his silence, giving him space to process. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes serious beyond his years. You were different, he said simply. Like you forgot who you were. The observation, so accurate and so painful, brought tears to my eyes. Yes, I whispered. I did forget, but I'm remembering now. 6 months after that fateful day at Winters Farm, we moved back to our old neighborhood in Westchester. Not to the same house, it had been sold long ago, but to a similar one on a nearby street that was smaller than our Greenwich mansion, with fewer bathrooms and no pool, but it felt right in a way the other house never had. Tyler re-enrolled in his old school, where he was welcomed back with enthusiasm by teachers who remembered him and friends who had missed him. David seemed happier than he had in years, the tension that had become a permanent fixture in his shoulders finally easing, and I found myself shedding the constant anxiety of keeping up appearances, of proving my worth through possessions and social connections. We kept in touch with the Winters family. To my ongoing surprise, Margaret seemed to genuinely enjoy our friendship, and I found myself driving up to the farm at least once a month to visit her. Sometimes I brought Tyler, who developed his own relationship with the feisty octogenarian. She taught him to drive a tractor, to identify edible mushrooms in the woods, to tap maple trees for syrup, practical skills that he treasured far more than the material advantages I'd tried to provide him with. I watched him blossom in those visits, becoming more confident, more grounded, more himself, and I realized with a bittersweet pang that this was what I should have been giving him all along, not status or connections, but roots, a sense of what endures, values that matter. The final piece of my transformation came almost a year after my humiliating first visit to Winters Farm. Margaret called me one evening, her voice unusually hesitant. Patricia, she said, I need to ask a favor. I was immediately concerned. In all our months of friendship, she had never asked anything of me. Of course, I said quickly, anything. She was quiet for a moment, then said, the farm. It's getting to be too much for me to manage alone. Jim and Linda do what they can, but they have their own jobs in town. Rachel helps when she's home from college. But I'm not as young as I used to be. My heart sank. Was she going to sell the farm? After all, the thought was unbearable. What can I do to help? I asked, ready to offer financial assistance if that would keep Winters Farm in the family. I've been thinking, Margaret continued, about starting a community-supported agriculture program, a CSA, they call it. Local families would pay a subscription fee at the beginning of the season and receive a share of whatever we grow each week. It would provide steady income, reduce the pressure of selling at farmers markets, and create a community around the farm. But I need someone to help set it up, handle the business side of things. And I thought of you. I was stunned into silence. After everything, she was asking me to help preserve and extend her family's legacy. Margaret, I finally managed. I don't know what to say. I'm honored that you would trust me with this. I could hear the smile in her voice when she replied, You've changed, Patricia. You see value in things beyond their price tag now. That's the kind of the person I want involved in this farm's future. And so, in a turn of events I never could have predicted, I found myself becoming part business partner, part adopted family member at Winters Farm. We launched the CSA program the following spring, starting small with just 20 families and gradually expanding as demand grew. I put my organizational skills and business background to good use, handling the administrative side while Margaret and her family continued the actual farming. David, who had been feeling increasingly restless in his corporate job, began spending weekends at the farm. learning from Jim and discovering a passion for sustainable agriculture that surprised us all. Tyler brought friends from school to volunteer, proudly showing them around his farm as if he'd grown up there. 3 years after my disgraceful first visit, we celebrated Margaret's 83rd birthday on the farm, a joyful gathering of family, friends, and CSA members who had become part of the extended Winters Farm community. As I watched her surrounded by 4 generations of her family, plus the new family members like us that she had collected along the way, I marveled at the richness of the legacy she had created. Not a legacy of wealth or status or possessions, but of connection, of purpose, of meaning. Standing there in the same spot where I had once pushed her aside in my entitled arrogance, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the wisdom and forgiveness that had transformed my life. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Margaret found me sitting alone on the porch steps, lost in reflection. She lowered herself carefully beside me, her movements slower now, but still remarkably spry for her age. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said, bumping my shoulder gently with hers. I smiled at the familiar gesture that had become part of our friendship. "I was just thinking about that first day. How far I've come. How far we've all come." She nodded, looking out over the farm as twilight settled over the fields. "You know what I thought when I first saw you?" she asked. I winced. "That I was a terrible person." She chuckled. "No, I thought, there's a woman who's lost her way, and I was right. But you found it again." Her simple assessment brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing something in me worth salvaging, for not giving up on me even when I'd given up on myself." Margaret shook her head. "I didn't salvage you, Patricia. You did that yourself. All I did was provide a place where you could remember who you really are." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. Finally, she patted my knee and said, "Help an old woman up, would you? These knees aren't what they used to be." I stood and offered my hand, supporting her as she rose to her feet. As we turned to go back inside, she paused and looked at me. "You know what I'm proudest of? That quilt you spilled coffee on that first day. It's hanging in my bedroom now, good as new. Some stains can be removed, Patricia. Some damage can be undone." I think about that conversation often now, as I sit on my own porch, recording this story for you. It's been 10 years since that day when I pushed an old woman aside, laughing at the idea that she could stand between me and what I wanted. 10 years of learning, growing, and building a life based on values rather than valuables. David and I eventually moved to a small house just a mile from Winters Farm. He left his corporate job entirely to work full-time with Jim on sustainable farming practices, and I split my time between managing the now thriving CSA program and teaching business skills at the local community college. Tyler graduated from college last year and is working for an environmental nonprofit in the city, but he comes home frequently, drawn by the sense of belonging he found at the farm. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep last winter, at the age of 92. In her will, she left the majority of the farm to her children and grandchildren, as everyone expected. But to our astonishment, she left us a small parcel of land with a cottage that had once been a caretaker's home. For Patricia and David Harris, the will read, who showed me that it's never too late to find your true north. We're renovating the cottage now, carefully preserving its character while making it our own. And on the wall of what will be our bedroom, Margaret's daughter Rachel has hung a small, framed square of fabric, a piece cut from the edge of that coffee-stained quilt, cleaned and preserved as a reminder of where our journey began. So, that's my story. From entitled socialite, to farmhand, to community builder. From someone who valued price tags to someone who values people and place. I'm not perfect. I still have moments of insecurity, still occasionally find myself yearning for external validation. But now, I recognize those feelings for what they are, echoes of the person I was, not directives for who I want to be. If you're listening to this and see something of yourself in my journey, I hope it gives you courage. Courage to question what you're really seeking. Courage to admit when you've lost your way. Courage to begin again, even when it means facing your own worst behavior. Because some stains can be removed, some damage can be undone. And sometimes, the most beautiful gift is the chance to become who You were meant to be all along. If you've listened this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a wake-up call that changed your direction? What values do you hold that can't be bought or sold? Leave a comment below, and if this story touched you in any way, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Sometimes the most important things we can give each other are not possessions, but possibilities. This is Patricia Harris, speaking to you from my porch, overlooking Winter's Farm, where I finally learned the difference between price and value. Thank you for listening.